My new boss publicly blamed me for her financial mess and froze my salary, thinking I'd quietly fade away. She forgot I was the sole signatory on the company's credit lines. So I simply stopped signing the renewals and waited for the inevitable collapse. This is where the corporate ladder breaks under the weight of arrogance, and you won't want to miss the fallout. Make sure you're subscribed to see who survives. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I knew the guillotine was falling the second I saw the grid of faces on my monitor. 200 people were logged into the company-wide quarterly review, their video feeds stacked like a towering wall of anxious, pixelated bingo cards. But the one square that mattered was black. Tracy Thorne, our new CFO, sat behind a camera that was turned off, represented only by a blank avatar, and her name written in that sharp, sterile sans-serif font she insisted on using for all internal branding. I was halfway through my fourth cup of black coffee, the caffeine doing nothing to settle the stomach acid that had been chewing at my lining since 4:00 a.m. I had built the financial infrastructure of this company from the ground up, surviving 3 mergers and a recession, but the silence coming from Tracy's square felt different. It felt like an execution. Then she cleared her throat. The sound was crisp, digital, and utterly devoid of warmth. "We need to be honest about our current performance and the misalignment of expectations," she began. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. Specifically, some of the more aggressive forecasting coming out of the enterprise finance team created unrealistic expectations for Q4 solvency. There it was, the first blade. I clicked the mute button on my microphone, though I hadn't made a sound. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the mesh digging into my shoulders, and waited for the twist. "Aggressive forecasting," she repeated, letting the phrase hang in the digital air like a foul odor. "Unrealistic expectations." That was how she framed the only reason this damn company had survived the last 2 fiscal years. I sat there staring at my screen, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. On the screen I saw heads tilt. A few senior directors squinted, their brows furrowing as they tried to process the cognitive dissonance. My name hadn't been spoken aloud, but everyone on that call knew who ran enterprise finance. They knew exactly who she was talking about. Then a sound cut through the tension, sharp and sudden. On someone's feed, a ceramic mug hit a desk. Maybe it was wood, maybe tile. Then silence returned. It might have been a nervous reaction from a junior analyst, or it might have been my own hand spasming, knocking my coaster aside. It didn't matter. That was the moment I realized the truth. They weren't just cutting my budget or sidelining me, they were rewriting the history of the company. They were turning me, the guy who had patched the leaking hull of this ship with duct tape and crossed fingers, into the iceberg that sank it. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was a total erasure of reality. The call ended 10 minutes later without a Q&A session. I didn't move, I didn't flinch, I didn't even blink as the participant count dropped from 200 down to 1. I clicked to another window, my hands moving on their own. It was muscle memory, forged over 7 years of late nights and early mornings. I bypassed the main server dashboard and pulled up a buried directory that I was fairly certain no one else in the C-suite even remembered existed. I had built this architecture in 2019, back when everything was held together by Spit, Grit, and Excel macros. They thought I was just some faceless number cruncher, a legacy relic they could discard to boost the quarterly margins. They had no clue I was the technician who kept the power grid humming while they played golf in Scottsdale and blew hot air at shareholder meetings. Tracy and her little clique of imported executives had been selling dreams to the board, while I had been rewiring reality in the basement just to make sure payroll cleared on Fridays. But sure, let's blame the forecasts. My phone pinged, a single cheerful chime that signaled a new email. Subject: HR Bulletin Status Update. I didn't have to open it to know what it said, but I did anyway. Temporary salary pause pending comprehensive performance review. No warning, no direct call, just a form letter shoved into a mass announcement system. I cross-referenced the employee IDs. 14 other people received adjustments that day, but mine was the only one frozen, zeroed out. After 7 years of cleaning up their disasters, they had iced me like a bad character in a canceled TV show. I closed the laptop lid, the screen going black. I swiveled my chair toward the window, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline. A cold wind was coming off the lake, rattling the glass. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot, anger is chaotic. I felt something else entirely, a cold, crystalline clarity. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an external hard drive I kept out of the rotation. It was dusty, labeled Legacy Contingencies, SEP 2019 in faded Sharpie. Inside that drive was a folder containing a PDF titled Intercomp Risk Shield Legal Final Draft. It was fully signed, executed, and filed. It had survived 5 CFOs, 3 legal reviews, and an acquisition that most people had already forgotten. Page 14, Clause 9.3, a single paragraph, badly worded, dense legalese easily ignored by anyone skimming for profit margins. But I had written it and I knew exactly what it did. But they had forgotten one crucial thing: a machine doesn't work if you remove the engine. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what I gave up for this company. I missed my son's graduation for a merger that fell apart. I spent my 50th birthday in a server room manually reconciling a ledger because the previous CFO had accidentally diverted tax funds. I was the ghost in the machine, the guy who made sure the lights stayed on. And then there was Tracy Thorne. She had been hired 6 months ago, headhunted from a flashy tech startup that had never actually turned a profit. She was all polish and vocabulary. She used words like synergy, paradigm, and holistic to mask the fact that she couldn't read a balance sheet without an interpreter. In our first meeting, she had looked around my office, stacked with physical files and 3 monitors running command line interfaces, and wrinkled her nose. "It's all a bit analog, isn't it, Marcus? We need to migrate to the cloud. We need to be lighter, faster." She saw me as a blockage in her sleek new pipe. She didn't realize I was the valve keeping the pressure from blowing the whole building apart. The document on my screen, Clause 9.3, was a specific legal trapdoor. It allowed the parent company to seize internal assets across all subsidiaries if and only if a credit facility failed to renew and defaulted. Technically, it was a shield, a way to protect the main entity from cascading losses in the event of a market crash. But it had one condition: the default had to be triggered by inaction, not fraud, not mismanagement, just silence. That was where my tripwires lay. I had set up rotating credit renewals every 90 days on about a dozen key facilities. These weren't huge loans, mid-size internal transfers between subsidiaries like Corbin Freight and Silo Haulage. They looked harmless, but I was the sole signatory on all of them. Every renewal needed a live biometric signature to stay valid. No auto-renew, no delegation, just me. I had pitched it that way years ago for oversight integrity. Nobody argued, hell, nobody even checked. It was just paperwork to them. Now they had cut me out, frozen my salary, publicly blamed me. They thought I would just take the severance package and fade into early retirement. I opened a spreadsheet I called the Watchmaker. It tracked every single renewal, time-stamped and countdown enabled. I hadn't touched it in over a year, but the clock was still ticking, precise and unforgiving. One facility, Corbin Freight's working capital line, $6.5 million, was due in 72 hours. My signature line was blank. One miss, one technical default. That was all it would take to light the fuse. Tuesday morning arrived with a deceptive quiet. The cold sunlight filtered through the blinds of my home office, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My laptop fan was already humming before I'd even touched the keys. The renewal deadline for the Corbin Freight line hit at 9:00 a.m. sharp. I sat there, coffee in hand, staring at the digital form. The signature block was a blinking cursor waiting like an open nerve. It needed my biometric key, a fingerprint scan linked to a hardware token sitting on my desk, to authorize the extension. I took a sip of coffee. I looked at the clock, 8:59 a.m. Then I just didn't sign. I let the window close. I didn't click decline. I didn't send an email explaining why. I simply did nothing. One click away and I let the moment pass. That was it. No fireworks, no alarms, just a quiet expiration. To the naked eye, nothing had changed, but I knew better. Somewhere in the guts of the company server, a compliance bot was running a routine sweep. It would flag the missing timestamp, compare it against the renewal schedules, and send a soft irregularity notice to risk management. Nothing dramatic, just a yellow triangle that said, "Attention required." I shifted from victim to observer. I was no longer the employee under review. I was the hunter watching the trap snap shut. Within an hour, someone in accounting forwarded the notice to legal. By lunch, the risk desk had a thread 10 messages deep, try ing to figure out if it was a system delay or human oversight. I had the read-only feed of the internal comms still open on my second monitor. My access hadn't been revoked yet, a classic oversight of a rushed termination process. Nobody even realized I could still see the chatter. By early afternoon, they started to smell smoke. "Who owns the renewal authorization? one lawyer asked in the chat. A reply popped up a minute later. Finance operations legacy signatory, I think. Another line appeared that was that him? I laughed under my breath, a dry, humorless sound. Still, they kept it quiet. They didn't want to spook the rest of the team. They labeled it routine reconciliation, but the tone in the chat shifted. I could see it in the timestamps, shorter gaps between messages, more CCs getting added. They were circling a problem they didn't want to name. Around 4:00 p.m., it finally slipped. A junior analyst from compliance, fresh face, probably 6 months out of college, wrote, "Isn't this line cross-linked to other subsidiaries?" Silence, no one answered for 15 minutes. Then a senior counsel finally wrote, "Let's confirm before escalating." Translation: panic, but do it quietly. I poured another whiskey. It was the cheap stuff, the glass still dusty from sitting on the shelf too long. I sat in front of the laptop watching them scramble through the digital corridors I'd built years ago. The machine was working exactly as I designed it, slow, invisible, mechanical. Each department was chasing its own tail while the gears underneath started to grind. A part of me wanted to feel something. Guilt maybe, but I didn't, not even anger anymore, just that cold, clean sense of inevitability. They had no idea how deep this went, how many dependencies hung off that one expired line. Every fix they tried just tightened the knot. They would request renewal authority, find my name locked as the primary custodian, and then hit an access denial because HR had already flagged me as under review. Corporate irony at its finest. They had frozen me out of my own system, and now they couldn't touch it without me. By 6:00 p.m., the private Slack channels started lighting up. Small groups of mid-level managers were trying to whisper solutions. Can we clone the authorization? Can we override the signature requirement? One tech guy tried to spoof it, but the macro script I'd built blocked all manual injections. A red pop-up appeared on his screen, signature mismatch. External edit attempt logged. That message alone probably ruined someone's evening. I leaned back, half smiling, and scrolled through the feed while the whiskey burned down my throat. Their panic had a rhythm: denial, confusion, fear, then silence. Like watching a fault line shift under glass. They figured I was at home sulking, maybe updating my resume. I could practically hear the board whispering, "Let's give him space, he'll calm down." They thought I was licking my wounds, but the truth, I was pulling wires, each one deliberate, each one exactly where it needed to be. And this was just the first tremor. At 7:42 p.m., I logged in through a secure tunnel and accessed the internal guarantee schedules for Silo Haulage and Bright Logistics. Both had backdoor guarantees tied to shared credit coverage. Both were expiring within hours. The override keys were still tied to my ID. I did nothing, I just let the clock run out. No signatures, no renewals. By 9:00 p.m., both lapsed clean. My old system, the one they still used without understanding it, registered the third point of failure. 3 failures across 3 subsidiaries, all within the trigger window. That's what Clause 9.3 needed, a pattern. It recognized it instantly. At 9:12 p.m., the automation script activated the liquidation sequence, not for the subsidiaries themselves, but for the internal buffer assets connected to them. The code queued a single output: asset reallocation process initiated. Execution pending, Friday 08:59:59. The system didn't shout, it didn't warn, it just moved. On the back end, a notice slipped into the legal queue, triggered by a legacy compliance tag no one had updated in 4 years. And just like that, the quiet machine I built started marching toward the kill switch. Inside 20 minutes, the risk team started lighting up the thread again. I refreshed the access window. They'd finally figured out it wasn't a single-point error. One message from the risk officer read, 3 linked defaults, possible clause conflict, possible seizure. At 9:50 p.m., a senior legal manager dropped the bomb. Clause 9.3, cross-subsidiary trigger confirmed. Then another reply, wait, that clause, I thought it was stripped after restructuring. Nope, still active, where's the override? I closed the lid of my laptop, stood up, stretched, and then opened a second machine. It was old, heavy, with a scratch screen and no stickers. I logged into a private drive. There was no override. The failsafe was biometric, left index fingerprint, encrypted keychain, tied to a physical hardware module that never left my apartment. Not out of paranoia, just habit. After all the dumb decisions I'd watched from that exec team over the years, you learn not to trust best practices. You build your own lock. By 10:30 p.m. my phone buzzed. Tracy, CFO, declined. A minute later again, then a third time. No voicemail, no text. They didn't want a record. They wanted me to quietly fix the fuse they had cut without asking what it was attached to. I left the phone face down and pulled up the server access log. They were probing every corner of the internal system. I saw failed access attempts tagged to temporary admin accounts. They were trying to create a new authorization chain to bypass the clause. I smiled. Every attempt pinged a silent audit notice. Even now, they were making it worse. At 11:04 p.m., someone reached out to my old assistant, Lauren. She hadn't worked there in over a year. She'd left to join a competitor across the river. They pinged her on LinkedIn. She screenshotted it and sent it to me immediately. "Hey, weird one. Someone from legal just asked if I had access to your original override files." I replied, "Let them keep digging." By midnight, the internal transcript leaked to me through Daniel, one of the finance guys still on payroll. He was someone I trained, someone smart enough to keep quiet. The quote he sent me was almost poetic. It was from the VP of Operations. "We can't stop it, he built it, we fired him and now it's running." I played it twice in my head, not out of pride, just confirmation. That was the sound of losing control. They thought they could patch this, that some engineer in a hoodie would find the switch, but they never understood the thing they let me build. This wasn't code, this was consequence. I stayed up, didn't even bother turning the lights off. Just brewed coffee at 11:00 p.m. and sat at my desk, blinds open, the city humming outside like it didn't know what was coming. On the second monitor, my access window blinked to life. Still active, still read-only. Inside HQ, they were losing it. The executive team was locked in the war room. I could see the internal calendar invites flood in, urgent, clause 9.3, action review, risk containment board special session. That last one hit just after midnight. They'd flown them in private jet panic mode. By 12:45 a.m., the dashboard they had once ignored now glared like a bomb timer. Auto-trigger status, armed, no override. Scheduled execution, Friday 09:00 a.m. They were reading the words I'd written 5 years ago, and for once, they were actually paying attention. By 6:00 a.m. Friday, the courier had already made the drop. A plain manila folder hand-delivered to HQ, addressed to the General Counsel. Inside was a printed copy of Clause 9.3, highlighted, annotated, and signed. The top corner still bore the faded initials of the original draft committee, mine included. They didn't even know who sent it, but I did, Daniel. He had saved a hard copy in his personal archives, probably knowing that one day the new regime would try to bury the truth. The folder landed on the General Counsel's desk just as the sun came up. She read it in front of the executive team, her voice flat but tight, like her throat was closing up. Line 18. Non-renewal of credit facility by signatory shall activate full cross-default procedure. Someone asked what that meant. Nobody answered, they already knew. At 6:17 a.m., the CEO logged into the emergency Zoom call from a cabin in Tahoe. His hair was a mess, his voice groggy, likely still recovering from whatever fundraiser or vendor dinner he'd attended the night before. He looked at the live dashboard for 5 seconds, then leaned forward, squinting. Execution pending, 08:59:59. No override, no pause button, no edit access, and absolutely no plan. Risk management tried to suggest freezing internal transfers. They got shot down immediately. Legal said any interference now would show intent to manipulate financial disclosures, which was a polite way of saying prison time. The CFO, Tracy, looked like she hadn't slept in 48 hours. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips chewed raw, they were cornered completely. Every conversation circled the same final truth. There was only one way to stop it. They said it like a curse, like even saying my name too loud might trigger something worse. Tracy finally muttered he wouldn't really let it go through, right? Silence, then someone asked the only question left. Has anyone heard from him? Not a single head moved. Even Tracy didn't speak, just kept staring at the screen, blinking rapidly as if the timer would freeze if she just wished hard enough. They had lawyers, they had auditors, they had emergency contacts and back channels, but what they didn't have was control. At 8:55 a.m. I logged in. Ed the same link as always, company Zoom, one last time. I kept the camera on. I was wearing a plain gray shirt, hair pulled back, no background blur, just me sitting in my home office exactly as I always was. The person they never bothered to see until everything started breaking. All the big faces were there. CEO, CFO, general counsel, head of ops, 3 outside legal advisors, and some board member I didn't recognize. And Tracy, front and center, she looked like someone had unplugged her. I didn't say good morning. I didn't ask if they'd had their coffee, I just clicked share screen. I brought up one single window, the clause 9.3 execution status. Timer ticking 0459. Nobody spoke at first, then the CFO unmuted. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been practicing lines in the mirror and forgot half of them. We can fix this, right, Marcus? She was nodding, a frantic bobblehead motion. We'll reinstate your pay, we'll reverse the decision immediately, just tell us what you need to stop it. I didn't answer, I just let the silence stretch until her voice hit the floor. She looked off screen, desperate. Legal tried to jump in next. Mr. Vance, we can draft an override authorization right now, emergency declaration. We can clear it with the board in 5 minutes. I clicked my mic on, one beat, two. You froze, the one guy holding the circuit breaker, I said. No yelling, no anger, just facts. And you did it to save a quarter's bonus. Tracy blinked fast. She looked like she might cry, but she couldn't afford to, not with the board watching. The CEO rubbed his temples like a migraine was splitting his skull. Marcus, the CEO started, his voice commanding but hollow. We can discuss terms, whatever you want. I looked at the timer, 0030. I hovered my mouse over the leave meeting button. I looked straight into the camera lens, making eye contact with every single one of them. Good luck, I said. Then I clicked out. No dramatic hang-up, no parting speech, just gone. I didn't close the laptop. I watched the timer on my end tick down, 30, 29, 28. The dashboard lights were already shifting. Systems were waking up, alerts queuing for transmission, letting the machine do exactly what I built it to do. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the system executed. There was no sound, no flash of light, just lines of cold data lighting up across servers in 3 states. Asset seizure initiated. Within seconds, internal loan guarantees evaporated. Auto default clauses pulled their weight for the first time in company history. Liquidity buffers vanished. Lenders got hit with red flags. Escrow agents triggered rapid release provisions. Subsidiaries, real ones, with trucks, equipment, and payroll, buckled like folding chairs under the sudden weight of the parent company's recall. Back at HQ, the boardroom fractured. I heard later that 2 board members stood up mid-call and walked out. Legal tried to reframe it as a technical misfire, but the timestamp didn't care. Everything hit exactly as coded. Tracy didn't say a word, she just dropped her face into her hands and stayed there. There was no fixing this, no rolling it back, it was done. The aggressive forecasting she had lied about was now the least of her problems. She had presided over a total institutional collapse. Across town on my desk, my phone buzzed once. I picked it up, a notification from my bank. Deposit received, $2,750,000. Clause 12.4. They had written it themselves years ago, a standard retention payout for legacy staff triggered by a structural default event. It was meant to keep executives safe if the ship went down. They had frozen my salary, sure. But in their rush to push me out, they forgot to cancel the clause that pays the one person who kept the ship afloat. Rookie mistake. I closed the banking app, pocketed the phone, and stood up. I put on my coat and walked out of the apartment. An hour later, I stepped into the lobby of my new office. Different logo, same skyline, higher floor. The receptionist smiled and waved me through. No paperwork, no onboarding. My badge worked on the first swipe. Inside, the office was cold but clean. Fresh coffee steamed on the desk. Behind the chair, hanging on the wall, was a single framed print I had brought with me. It was a copy of Clause 9.3, highlighted under glass. And right beneath it, a small metal plaque I'd ordered weeks ago. Next time you squeeze the mechanic, check who built the engine. I sat down, took a sip of coffee, and finally, for the first time in 6 months, I relaxed. The company across town was burning, Tracy was explaining her vision to federal auditors, and I was exactly where I needed to be.